Hey, squishies. Take two. I was just recorded. Well, I just talked for upwards of 10 minutes before I noticed that I wasn't recording. So this video is off to a great start. This is the movie Coco. It's a commission vlog for Nick Borovic. And yeah, let's try this again. So this was a great movie. It was really, really good. It was already, even before it was commissioned, it was on my list of movies from last year that I missed seeing and wanted to double back and watch. Because there ended up being quite a few of those. I did not get out to the movies much last year. And this is the first one I've actually been able to do because of being commissioned, so thank you. If only I could find a way to get someone to commission me to watch Hidden Figures or Get Out, but neither of those is animated, so not happening. Anyway, great movie. I can't speak to the representation aspect, which is probably the most important thing about it. My understanding is they generally did a good job. I know there was a lot of controversy overall, or early on, mostly arising from Disney attempting to trademark the name Dia de los Muertos, which, yeah, I can kind of understand that. If Disney tried to trademark the name of one of my holidays, there would be words and lawyers. I don't know where I'd get a lawyer, but I'm sure, seeing as I'm Jewish, I'm sure if Disney tried to trademark one of our holidays, we would be able to find a lawyer. There's a couple of Jewish lawyers out there. Yeah. Anyway, so I can't speak directly to that part of it, but my understanding is after that initial controversy, Disney ended up actually doing a pretty good job. Most of the cast, the names looked like Latina. Not really anybody in the writing or directorial side of things, except apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently Adrian Molina is Latino. So they did have a little. But regardless, they seem to have done a good job because, the movie was huge in Mexico, apparently. So apparently they did a good job of depicting Mexican culture. Which is really, I feel like sometimes there's two things that get conflated, and I feel like they're both important, and they should be looked at, independently. And that's the two-pronged issue of, representation and employment discrimination, which both are issues in Hollywood. I think it's two problems. One is that there's, Hollywood is dominated by white folks, and it's harder for people of color to get jobs at any level in any part of Hollywood. It's harder for actors of color to get work. It's, harder for, there aren't a ton of writers who are people of color. There aren't a ton of producers who are people of color. I should say, there are a ton of writers who are people of color. They're not getting hired. You're not seeing their names in movies. So there's that problem, and that problem helps create the second problem, which is that you don't see a lot of people of color in movies. You don't see a lot of their characters, their stories, their cultures. Movies are very, very white. And the two problems are related, but they are two problems. So, for example, Avatar The Last Airbender, when they made the movie for that, there was a huge controversy because independently of the movie sucking, it also, like, recast all of these Asian heroes, like, as white people. And a lot of people were understandably very upset about that because what little representation they had was being taken away. But if you look at the cast list and the people who worked on Avatar The Last Airbender, it was created by two white guys. Most of the cast were white. I'm sure someone will come in and correct me, but I think of the major the major recurring characters, the only people of color were Mako and Dante Bosco, who at least initially played villains. Very rapidly becomes clear that they're more complex than that, but in the first episode, they're the villains. But because it's animated, the faces you see, the characters are still Asian. So the representation is there, but the employment discrimination is still a problem. So it's separate issues. But this movie, like, apparently did a good job on the representation. And looking at the cast list, like, it could have done a better job with directors and writers and producers. Well, producer is a little, because you basically have to be rich to be a producer. So, really, it's less a matter of getting more, there it's not just Hollywood that's the problem. But for the directors and writers, like, they should be hiring people. They should be hiring more people of color. And for a movie like this, they should have had more than one Latino guy. But at least they had the one. And the cast, it looks, just judging by the names, looks like they did a pretty good job. So the employment discrimination, they did a good job on, and based on how Mexico in particular responded to the movie, it sounds like, in terms of representation, they did a good job. As for the movie itself, it was a good movie, like I said. It very much was the Pixar formula. It was unlikely buddies who form a friendship on a road trip and have one point where they have a falling out because they find out one or both are liars, but then they come back together to save the day. Cool. I mean, it's formula, but it's a solid formula, and it's well executed. And there's enough originality in everything else, in the visuals, in the music, that the fact that the story is a little cliche isn't really a huge deal. And frankly, they land the emotional punches they need to land. This is the first time a Pixar movie has made me cry since either Up or Toy Story 3. I forget which those was first. And those are the only three that have made me cry. Now, part of that is because I'm currently on drugs that have emotional volatility as a side effect. But I don't think it was just that. I think they really did a good job of that kind of, warm family feeling of, basically it's when I knew it was coming. From the moment he said he used to sing that Hector said he used to sing to Coco, I knew that was going to be how they saved Hector, how they got Coco to remember him, would be Miguel singing the song to her when he got back to reality. But it still, the tears came. As soon as that happened, and they just got more intense when his family showed up. Like when we saw the whole family, living and dead, celebrating together around Miguel's music. And that acceptance. Because, for me at least, this movie was not really about music. So, the great-grandfather left his family behind, seized his chance to be himself. But that entailed leaving his family behind, and his family was very upset about that, and they're super conservative, and so they won't allow Miguel to be truly himself. So he hides a bunch of stuff up in the attic, and there he can be who he really is. And then his family discover that and are both afraid for him and furious at him and destroy it, and he runs away and has this whole adventure and has this moment where he connects with the great-grandfather and says, I always, finds out the truth about the great-grandfather and says, I always felt like I was different, and now I know I got it from you. And yeah, I'm talking about being gay. Or trans, or anything in that realm. To me, that's where my brain went. That, what Miguel had up, swap out the guitar and the, memorabilia about the old actor, swap it out for, magazines with pictures of buff guys, or, women's clothing, or anything like that. And the whole thing plays out exactly the same. Except a bit more believably, because we're used to people arbitrarily and undeservedly rejecting that in their children. We're not used to them rejecting musicality so much. Maybe, okay, have it as a hobby, but, stick with your studies or whatever would be one thing. But this kind of no music, that came out weirdly Eastern European, and I don't know why. Anyway, that's kind of how I read it. That interpretation is a little weakened by the twist, which actually got me. I assumed that he would get to the great-grandfather, and the great-grandfather would say, I don't care about family. I put all that behind me. As far as I'm concerned, you're not my great-great-grandson. And it would be this outright rejection, and then he would do a musical number and bring the whole family together. Miguel, would do a musical number and bring the whole family together. I was not expecting the great-great-grandfather to embrace him, and then turn out to be outright evil. I was expecting him to be more of a jerk than a murderer. So that got me. But, that kind of throws off the interpretation, because, of course, Hector wanted to go back to his family, loved his daughter, loved his wife, got murdered before he could. It's a very different story. So that narrative still holds a little bit for Miguel, but doesn't hold so well for Hector. So, still, I feel like that's what for me, that's what it spoke to. other than that, it was just like, even all of that aside, it was still like a really good movie. Like visually, it was just incredible. Um, just really popped. Despite being very dark, like just palette wise, it nonetheless managed to be vibrant and bright. Which, from what I've seen, like I've never been to a Day of the Dead celebration. The, I don't know. I mean, there's a reasonably sized Hispanic community in this area. I don't know why I've never seen it. Maybe the people in this area come from a country that doesn't do it. I know in the U.S. at least it's more of like a southwestern thing. And I'm on the East Coast, so maybe it's just like whatever countries provided most of the Hispanic people in this area are ones that don't have big Day of the Dead celebrations, or maybe I just never heard about them because I'm, pasty. And I know a few Hispanic people. Not a ton. I don't know. That aside, I've never been to one, but from what I've seen, it looks like that's kind of the visual aesthetic. It's night, but there's a lot of very colorful, bright stuff. And that's really what this movie hit in both its visuals and its general tone. Like, this is a movie about death and forgetting, and manages to be basically fun. It's although it did make me cry, it's not like Toy Story 3, which was practically maudlin. Like, that movie was just suffering. It wasn't, I don't mean in the sense of it being a bad movie, I just mean in the sense of like, very little happy happens in that movie. And even the happiness that does happen is bittersweet. And this movie is not like that. It's dark, but it's fun and it's happy and it's vibrant and it's energetic, and I like that. It's perky goth. Actually, visually, it's somewhere between perky goth and raver goth, just because of all the very bright, intense, almost neon colors. But yeah, it was a really good movie. I'm really glad I watched it. Thank you, Nick, for commissioning it. And I will see all of you next time. Bye.